Hey everybody, you're watching ASMR Angel Reads. Sorry I took so much time in the middle of a chapter, chapter 4 we're doing, but I hadn't been feeling well, and then US Open tennis is on, and I've been watching that. Tennis is my favorite sport. That's really the only one I watch. But anyway, we're going to continue with chapter 4. And a little recap of chapter 4, what we read so far. Let me see. Guerin is the bard who was Rodri in a different life, in the main life. Lysa was Jill in the main life. And Tannic was Jill's dad Cullen in their main life. And on chapter 4, Tannic is chasing after Lysa, the wife of the bard. That's Guerin is the bard. So here he's chasing after the bard's wife. So we'll just continue on. What I want to know is this, Adern said. Why do herbs work on fevers and stuff? Well now, Nevin said, that's a very long question to answer. Do you want to listen to a talk? I do. That is all splendid. They were kneeling at the floor of Nevin's hut and working with the herbs, turning them over to dry them evenly. Almost every day Adern came down to help and study herbcraft. After his long loneliness, Nevin found the boy chatter amusing. Very well, Nevin went on. There are 4 humors, you see, in every human body. They match the 4 elements, fire, water, air, and earth. When all the humors are in perfect balance, the person is healthy. Each herb has more or less of a various humor. They balance things out if someone is sick. If someone has a fever, they have too much fiery humor. Febrigeal herb has lots of cool, watery humors and helps balance the fire out. Only 4 humors? I thought there should be 5. Nevin sat back on his heels in surprise. Well, so there are, but only 4 in the body. The 5th rules the others from the spirit. Adern nodded, carefully memorizing the lore. More and more, Nevin was wondering if the lad meant to be his new apprentice. The wondering made him weary, since a Dwemer man could only have 1 apprentice at a time. He could never take Adern on while bringing Bragawin to the Dwemer to fulfill his vow. At times, in the hope of seeing Lysa, Nevin would take Adern back to the dun on horseback. Often in the hot afternoons, the various members of the household would be sitting on the grassy hill. Since Nevin was now well known, one or the other of them would come over to ask him some medical question, or to buy a few herbs or such like. It was there that he met Tannic one afternoon and saw his weird tangled around him like a fisherman's net round its prey. Leading the horse, Nevin and Adern were walking up the hill when Nevin noticed Kata sitting with one of the riders, a hard-eyed southern man. Adern noticed it too and went skipping over. Kata, I'm going to tell Mam on you. You shouldn't be here with Tannic. Hold your tongue, you little beast. Won't. I'm going to tell. Tannic got up, and something about the way he looked at Adern frightened him, so frightened Nevin into hurrying over. Slapping a bard's son is a good way for a man to get his name satirized, Nevin remarked. And what's it to you, old man? Tannic swung his head around. As their eyes met, Nevin recognized Garrett's soul in the air blazing out of his eyes. You better not insult Nevin, Adern said. He's a Dwemer man. Hold your tongue. I am in no mood to listen to this nonsense from a flea-bitten cub. Tannic started to swing open-handed at the boy, but Nevin caught him by the wrist. The wild folk flocked to him and lent him as much of their strength that no matter how Tannic struggled, he could not break free from the urban's grip. Nevin pulled him close, caught his gaze, and stared deep into his eyes while he let the hatred burn, and Dwemer lay behind it. Tannic went dead white and stopped struggling. I said leave the lad alone, Nevin whispered. Tannic nodded in a terrified agreement. When Nevin released him, he turned and ran for the gates of the dun. Cotta, take Addo back home to his mother, Nevin said. I'm going back to the farm. So all the actors in their grim little farce were here, even Garrett, face to face again in the way that Nevin had never foreseen. He realized that he'd fallen into a last vestige of royal pride, which values only the prince and the princess and sees those around them only in super mummeries. I don't know what that means. For the next few days, Nevin stayed away from the dun and his old enemy. But in the end, Lysa came to him, turning up at the farm one day with a plausible excuse that she'd come to fetch Addern home. Nevin sent the boy out on an errand and offered Lysa the only chair he had, a wobbly three-legged stool. She perched on it and looked idly around at the hanging bunches of drying herbs. The smell in here is so lovely. It's kind of you, sir, to be so patient with my Addo. You should hear him chatter about it at dinner. Today we learned all about the dog's tooth herb. Today we dried the comfrey roots. His father hardly knows what to think. Does it vex Guerin? Most men want their sons to show an interest in their own calling. Oh, it doesn't, because he's my man and the best-hearted man in the world. I think he'd be glad to see Addern taking such an interest in something. He's been a strange child from the moment he was born. Nevin smiled, quite sure of that. I'm surprised you don't have more children. You seem to love your lads so much. Well, I hope and pray to have more soon. Lysa looked away, her eyes dark. I had a daughter, you see, between the two lads, but we lost her to a fever. I'm truly sorry. That's a hard thing for a woman to bear. It was. Her voice was flat. Her voice went flat from remembering the grief. Well, doubtless it was my weird and my poor little Danigans too. Nevin felt the cold touch of as he wondered if indeed it was her weird, since she drowned with child on her own terrible night. So she had. The Dwemer chill ran down his back as he realized who the child might have been if it had lived to raise herself with Rhaegar, a great master of Dwemer indeed. Lysa smiled, looking out onto the door. Here comes my Addern now, she said, although she was only speaking casually. Our Addern, meaning only the Addern we both know and not some other Addern. Her words turned Nevin cold to the heart. I swore I'd raise the child as my own, he thought. A vow's a vow. That night, Nevin went down to the ash tree by the riverbank and sat down to watch the slow water run. As it came clear, his weird lay heavily on him. In this life, Bragawin was gone from him, and she would have to repay Blaine for the hopeless love of her that had led them to his death, and to repay Addern, too, for cutting short his previous chance on life. Nevin owed Blaine and Addern a debt as well, since his scheming had left Bragawin there with her brother's lust. Only once those debts had been repaid could he take her away for her dreamer. Yet Addern would be under his care for the next 20 years, because the Dwemer is a slow craft to learn. In 20 years, Nevin was going to be over 90, and what if he had to wait for her to be reborn again? He would be well over 100, an unthinkable age, so old and dry that he would be helpless in a chair, like a thin stick or drooling babe. his body too old for the soul it carried, his mind a prisoner in the decaying lump of flesh. At the moment, Nevin panicked, shaking, cold, and sick, and no longer master of his dreamer, but an ordinary man. Just as when a warrior vows to die in battle, but he has the horns blow the charge, he sees death riding for him and weeps, sick of his vow when retreat is impossible. I need my glasses. Around him, the tremor of night wind picked up cool, rustling the canopy of branches above him. Nevin rested his face in his hands and called on his trained will to stop himself from shaking. A vow's a vow, he told himself. If I wither, then let me wither, so long as I fulfill my vow. The wind stroked his hair like a friendly hand. He looked up, realizing that it was no natural wind, but the wild folk, Sliff and Sprite, half-seen forms and the flick of shining wings, a face showing here only to vanish there. They came to him as friends and felt his agony, clustering sympathetic lives forming from the raw surge of elemental life. Nevin felt his weariness ebb away as he freely poured out some of his life to them, a gift between friends. He rose, walked forward, and stared up at the sky where the glitter of a great white drift of stars, the snowy road, splendid, unreachable, but shining in with promise. When he laughed aloud, his laugh was full and clear as a lad's. He saw his weird open up in front of him, maintained by his work in the wildlands. He would have life for the task, no matter how long it took as men measured time. It was that night that he learned this lesson. No one is ever given a weird too harsh to bear as long as it's taken up willingly and fully deep in the soul. At times, Lysa would leave Assern with Kata and walk to the farm to fetch Adern back from the herbman. She liked the moments of solitude when she could walk alone, away from the busy press and chatter of her life among the women of the household. She also found herself drawn to old Nevin for reasons she couldn't quite understand. Well, he's a wise, kind man who's traveled much, she would tell herself. It's always interesting to meet someone new. Reason enough, of course, but at times she went to see him because she felt safe there, out of the fort and away from Tannic. She knew perfectly well that young rider was pursuing her and lived in dread that her husband might notice. Lysa simply had too much to lose to be interested in adultery. A high social position, a good husband, wealth, comfort, and above all, her children. On an afternoon when the heat lay as palpable as a blanket over the land, Lysa left the dun earlier than usual and dawdled her way down the dusty road to the farm. About halfway along stood a copse of aspen trees where she decided to rest for a few minutes. She walked into the parched shade, glanced around for a place to sit, and saw Tannic waiting for her. He stood as still as one of the trees, his head a little to one side, and he was smiling, looking her over with the sort of admiration a man gives to a beautiful horse in a market. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "What do you think? I wanted a word with you. I've naught to say. You'd best get back before the captain finds you gone." When he stepped towards her, she drew back, her hand at her throat, her heart pounding. "I've got to be on my way. My lad will come along soon enough, if I'm not there to meet him." This likely witness gave Tannic pause. Abruptly, Lysa realized that she was afraid he would rape her. For all his good looks, Tannic repelled her in a way that she couldn't understand, like seeing a dead animal rotting on the road. She knew the repulsion was daft. Rationally, she could admit that he was a decent enough rider. "May I walk with you a ways, then?" Tannic made her a courteous bow. "You can't," Lysa heard her voice rise to a scream. "Leave me alone." She found herself racing out of the copse like a startled deer, running down the road until she was sobbing for breath and drenched with sweat. Half in tears, she spun around, but mercifully he hadn't followed. That night it was so hot that it took a long time to get the children to sleep. The boys tossed and turned and whined on top of the blankets no matter how soothingly Lysa talked to them. Finally, Guerin came in and sang them to sleep. Lysa went to their chamber, changed into thin nightdress, and laid down. In a bit, Guerin joined her. He hung the candle lantern up on the wall and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Don't you have to return to our lord?" Lysa said. "I begged his leave. I need to talk with you." In the shadowed light, his eyes were cold and questioning. She sat up, feeling her hands shaking, and twisted a bit of her dress between her fingers. "Here, my sweet," he went on, "you've been keeping dangerous company these days." "Oh, am I now? Who?" "Tannic. Who else would I mean?" She clenched the cloth so hard her fingers ached. "My lord, I swear to you that I want nothing to do with him. Do you doubt me?" "Never, but I don't want my woman raped out in the stables." When Lysa started to cry, partially in grief and partially from seeing her worst fears shared, Guerin pulled her gently into his arms. "My poor sweet little lass," he said, "here, don't weep like that." "How can I not weep? Ah, ye gods, if you come to doubt me, what will you do? Cast me off? Cut my throat and all for the thing I'd never do?" "Hush, hush," Guerin stroked her hair. "I'd die myself before I'd do you the slightest harm." As suddenly as they'd come, her tears vanished before a new fear. She looked up and found his face set and grim. "If you challenge Tannic, he'll win. Please, Guero, I beg you, don't. Just don't. What good would it do me if I had my honor and no husband?" "I'm not going to do anything of the sort. Do you despise me? Think me a coward all because I can't match him in a fight?" "Don't be a dolt. I could have married lots of bloodthirsty men, but I never wanted anyone but you." Guerin smiled as if he didn't quite believe her. They were both trapped, she saw, caught by customs that gave a man no recourse but to defend his wife with a sword. They would have to creep around the edge of Tannic's arrogance and pride of a true-born warrior, which thinks it can win a woman with a sword in a world where other men secretly agree. Lysa hated Tannic more than ever. No matter what the end of this, her marriage would never be the same. She could only pray that Guerin would never slip over the edge into hopeless violence. Her fear combined with that of the heat to give Lysa a restless night of bad dreams. Finally she woke deep into the night and heard a strange sound outside the tower. As she lay awake trying to place it, the two children came busting into their chamber. "Dad, Mom, it's the wind. The wind's here. It's going to rain." Just as Guerin woke with a muffled oath, Asern clambered onto the bed. "Clouds, clouds, clouds, Da!" Adern grabbed Lysa's hand and dragged her to the window. She could see storm clouds piling up in the sky, scuttling in front of the moon, the smell of the cool, heady scent of the north wind. The ward was full of noise as the household ran outside to laugh and point and gloat in the feel of the wind. Since there was no hope of getting the children back to sleep, Lysa got them dressed and took them down to the ward in the blessed coolness. Close to dawn there was a clap of thunder, and rain came pouring down cold in great sheets of water. Grown men and women ran around and laughed like children as it rained and rained and rained. Laughing, his yellow hair dripping and plastered down, Guerin scooped Adern up in his arms and held him up to see the dawn breaking silver through the rain. "There you go, Addo," Guerin said. "The horse wasn't wasted after all." "It wasn't the priest who did it. It was Nevin." At first Lysa thought he meant no one, but then she remembered the herbman. Now here, what could Nevin have to do with it? "I saw him do it. I dreamt it." "Dolt," Asern said, simpering. "Da, Otto's a dolt." "Hush," Guerin said. "It doesn't matter who started the rain. We've got it, and that's what matters." Lysa gave him a grin. Blood or beer would starve this winter, but as she turned to glance idly around the ward, she saw Tannic close at hand watching her, while the water ran down her face and hair. All at once she couldn't breathe. She felt herself choking in what could only be described as terror. She grabbed Asern's hand tightly. "Time to go in. Let's get dry." Too late. Guerin had seen Tannic too, and he looked to his enemy. Lysa knew that he was thinking of blood. It rained steadily for 3 days. Life moved inside the tower and centered itself in the great hall where Lord Merrick drank with his warband and the bards sang, keeping them all amused. Much to Kata's annoyance, Lysa insisted on staying in her chambers, giving Kata no choice but to stay with her. Finally, on the third day, Kata's boredom got the better of her subservience. "Oh, please, my lady, can't we go down to the hall? We can listen to your lord sing." "I'd rather not, but you can if you want." "Oh, my thanks." Gleefully, Kata threw her sewing into the work basket. "And you sure you won't come?" "I won't. All the riders will be there." Lysa looked away. "It's so noisy and I've got a headache." Kata turned down to the great hall and took a place in the straw in front of the servants' hearth. One of her friends, Dwala, was already listening while the bard sang sad tales of love, Kata's favorite kind. From where she was sitting, Kata could see the riders at the table and Tanik's broad back, only a few feet from her. But he might as well have been on the other side of the world. In her heart, Kata cursed him and wondered how he could be so cold to her. Certainly, plenty of other men told her she was beautiful. When Guerin paused to rest, Dwella leaned over and whispered to Kata, "Tana was asking me where you were, where your lady was, but it comes to the same thing." All at once, Kata wondered if it did indeed come to the same thing. Whenever Tanik came walking with them, he always spoke to the lady, not the maid. He wouldn't dare meddle with the bard's woman, she thought, and besides, I'm prettier than her. Yet as she gazed at Tanik's broad back, she wondered if any woman ever really understood what men thought. When the next day dawned clear, Lysa gave Kata permission to take Adern down to the farm and visit her mother. While the lad worked with the herbman, Kata spent a pleasant hour in her mam's kitchen and gossiped about her sisters, who were already married, much to Kata's great distress. It just wasn't fair. She was the prettiest and still unmarried, while they all had men of their own. Brooding on the injustice of it all gave her an idea. She left the house and went to the herdsman's hut, where she found Nevin and Adern digging up a bit of ground by the wall for an herb garden. "Good morrow," Nevin said. "Is it time for Adern to go home?" "Oh, not truly. I just wanted a word with you about buying some herbs." Nevin took Kata inside his hut and gave her a stool to sit on while he leaned on the wall. Kata decided that his manners were ever so much nicer than Tanik's. She only wished she could tell Tanik that and have him care. "I was wondering if you made love philters," Kata asked. I couldn't pay much, but my mistress gives me coin every now and then." "A maid with your beauty should have no need of such trash, and trash they are. They're impious things, and besides, they never work right." Kata's heart sank. Though she didn't care about the impiety, she saw no need to waste her coin on something useless. "Come now," Nevin went on. "Is Tanik as cold to you as all that?" Kata wondered if he were Dwemer or if he'd simply been obvious. When she decided the later, her cheeks burned with shame. "Well, it's a nasty thing to love a man who'll never love you." "No doubt it is, but Tana would only make a bad husband even if you got him. He's a hard man and a cold one." "Oh, he's not as cold to some as he is to me." "Oh, indeed, I begin to understand there's a bit of jealousy in this." "Well, it's rotten and unfair. There he is hanging around a woman who's already got her own man, and besides, she doesn't even like him." "Now listen, lass, if Tanik's the sort of man who wants to marry a woman, can't you see that you'd do just better for yourself than him?" All at once the old man hesitated, turning to her with ice-cold stare. "Just what married woman? Your lady?" In panic, Kata tried to think of a lie, but those cold eyes seemed to be boring into her very soul. "Well, it is, but truly, sir, she hates him. She'd never betray her husband with him, truly." "Oh, ye gods, don't tell Guerin, will you?" "Rest assured I'd never do anything of the sort. And listen, child, you hold your tongue too, hear me? For the life of you, not one word of this tattling to Guerin." Too frightened to speak, Kata nodded her agreement. As soon as Nevin turned away, she got up and ran out of the hut. Okay, that's it for today. I'll get it posted by nighttime. Thanks for watching. Bye.